Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I just want to take a minute to thank Council and certainly members of the public for coming to attend today. What we're going to talk about here is community mobilization. And just for their information before we get started, there was actually a 30-some page business plan that was approved by the Board of Police Commissioners several months ago, as well as approved at the Regional Sectorial Committee within the city to move forward with this. As a result of this, part of the strategy to obviously learn the do's and don'ts, which we'll be talking about here today, is a team went to Scotland now. Scotland was basically in support of our business plan to find out some things, the do's and don'ts as per se, and see what needs to be done. And I think I'd just like to take a minute to recognize those team members that went with me. The presentation that I'm doing today is something that any one of our team members can do. It's joint information. Obviously, there's certain slides that might certainly apply to myself, as well as others would have different slides. But overall, 90% of the presentation is based on the information that we collected as a team. So on that trip, we had Alan Nunn, Superintendent Sask River Schools, Brett Enns, Senior Manager of Mental Health and Addictions at the Department of Health Region, Ida Wilcox, Senior Manager of Social Services, Faith Stupnikoff, the Regional Intersectorial RIC Coordinators, Ken Hunter, a Bylaw Manager of Prince Edward Police Service, Ron Anderson, the IT Manager of the Police Service, Brent Kalinowski, Sergeant Brent Kalinowski of the Family Safety Unit, as well as Inspector Jamie McKinnis of the RCMP North District, as Dorothy Banka, a Policy Analyst from Government, and Norm Taylor, a Consultant. For those of you who have seen this presentation before, I apologize. Certainly, I will try to be quick and brief, but certainly I will try to cover all of this material. Now, this started for background purposes over 2 years ago when I was in Boston taking a police leadership course. And that police leadership course was put on by Boston University in combination with Harvard instructors. And really, why this is in the presentation is this was the chance that actually I had to step off the dance floor, as we say, step into the balcony and actually look at your business. Better put, probably work on your business rather than in your business. And certainly was one of the key principles to get to pen and paper and start looking at the overall trends and how maybe we can do things differently as a business plan. The second part I put in there, as an entrepreneur, I have a background as an entrepreneur, and up until about 9 months ago, I moderated a group of entrepreneurs in Saskatchewan with Entrepreneurs International, and that's a group of business people across Saskatchewan with anybody sales with around 5 million up until 200 million. And I only put that in here because it's relevant to this presentation and one of the things that we'll talk about later. The third thing that I have in there is I was appointed to the health region some 2 years ago by the province and the premier, and this to me was paramount because it let me look at things through another set of eyes other than just the police set of eyes, and I'll speak to that as we move on. So when we talk about the trends, the Prince Edward Police Service trends as per se were something that we knew if we don't change things that we're not going to be able to keep up. Arrests are going up, certainly the social issues are growing, certain aspects of this, which we will speak to in some of these trends, means that we need to focus on how we can have an impact on changing the inputs into the system, and I'll talk about that. Northern Saskatchewan, that's a picture of a black swan. If you want to read a good book, read The Black Swan. It's the first black swan that was discovered in Australia. Obviously, they didn't know what to do with the black swan because everybody's picture was a white swan up until that point. A black swan came along and basically they had to treat it differently and they had to think differently. Northern Saskatchewan is an anomaly. We have a lot of things that are unique. When we're talking about the social aspect of it, there's even more uniqueness. But really, the slide is in there because when it's an anomaly, you can't deal with it the same way. You have to look at different solutions. In other words, although we have many similarities in other parts of Saskatchewan, there's different aspects of looking at Northern Saskatchewan versus Saskatoon and Regina. And until we recognize and realize that, we're probably not going to reach our goals and where we want to get to if we're moving forward. This is some of the background information. 2,950 to 6,800 arrests in 8 years. Obviously, that's a neat change. The reality is we were heading north towards 8,000. Put that in perspective, I believe Saskatoon is somewhere in the 10, 11, 12,000 range of arrests, and that's apples to apples. So as you can see, and you've heard me speak about this lots, we're not going to arrest our way to our troubles when it comes to the social aspect of our issues. This basically is something, as you can see, has considerable growth, and we'll speak about that as we move forward. The demographics, certainly in Prince Albert, the 15 to 24 segment is probably the largest segment of our demographics. That's most, by national statistics, most likely to commit a crime or be a victim of crime. When you look at our feeder system and you hear that the trends are trending upwards in northern Saskatchewan, in the not too distant future, 50% of northern Saskatchewan will be under 15, you can reasonably project, unless we change the inputs, you can probably bet on the return better than you can on your RSP because of the uncertain economic times. So the reality is our demographics and the indicators tell us that we have to look at things different if we're going to try to change the outskip of the landscape. Norm, I gave him a specific slide because, as I mentioned, Norm Taylor went with us to Scotland. Norm is a consultant out of Toronto. He's working on a bigger piece within the province right now that used to be called the Future of Policing. Now it's the Future of Community Safety. He's an academic. When he came in and we were looking at our mobilization plan, at the same time the province was looking at the future. Thank you very much. The question to Norm was, Norm, surely the heck we're in Prince Albert. There has to be somewhere else in the world right now that can give us the answers or support what we're looking at as far as mobilization. He gave us two examples. One being in Africa. Good luck going to Africa. We heard about Scotland now. But, and the other one was in Scotland. And so we start digging into Scotland and say, okay, why are we going to go to Scotland? Well, let's look at Scotland. Scotland has high alcohol usage. It's disproportionate in the UK, one of the highest. It has a low life expectancy, disproportionate in the UK, one of the lowest. It has high youth violence. As a matter of fact, it's, when we saw someone on CCTV camera, it's not only disproportionate, but it's disturbing. The domestic violence in Scotland is extremely high. As a matter of fact, it was a crisis at one point, and obviously, which called for action. Teen pregnancy is disproportionate in the UK, one of the highest teen pregnancy rates within that region. Drug usage, disproportionate, again, one of the highest in the region. Their education standards were below average, again, one of the lowest in the region when comparing to their comparators in the UK. Gangs. In the area where we studied was in Glasgow. They had 177 territorial gangs. Now, the difference between our gangs and their gangs are the territorial based. Where you live, where your family is situated, you could be born into a gang, and obviously you inherit that trait. Somewhat different than our gangs, but the reality is they participate in many of the activities that make the comparator very similar in relation to what our gangs do in the community. One Scot dies every 3 days from alcohol use. Housing problems were a national crisis, not only in the stock, but the quality of housing. Knife violence, this one was interesting. Just before we were there, there was a group of plastic surgeons in Scotland, and they were studying because a lot of the youth, a lot of the young kids there will cut each other on the face. What a better way to learn your trade is actually when you have that many cases in front of you. So if you would go into a mall or if you go into an establishment and you would look, you would see people with large cuts on their face, obviously, and scars. High HIV, high FC, disproportionate in the UK, certainly one of the highest. They have a high suicide rate, especially among young people. They have high unemployment, actually in parts of Glasgow, 83% unemployment rate. So when you look at all this and you think about that, bang, that's us. 14, 15 key indicators that are exactly the same as us. Now there's a couple, 3 more that we could have put in there, but what that really tells us is when we studied that and we looked at it, you know, and when I spoke, one thing that became clear to me is our issues are not First Nations. Our issues are marginalized people. Now that doesn't mean that we don't have cultural solutions that are absolutely necessary to go forward, but the reality is it's marginalized people is the similarity. Now, when I spoke about this at Prince Albert Grand Council and a group of chiefs before I had the actual presentation, I mentioned and I was challenged and said, okay, Chief, you can come up here and tell us what we need. And I said, Chief, in all due respect, because we have a seriously strong relationship with First Nations, I said, I'm not telling you what needs to be done. I'm just showing you some things that can be done that work. And more importantly, it's up to us collectively to do it together for all. And when I said that, it obviously got a significant amount of support. And the reality is it's going to take some steps forward, and we're going to get into some of that in the presentation. So when we look at our trend calls, dispatch per capita, this is basically looking at us and the other major police services in the province. Now, 3 of these are on the same records management system, so they're apples to apples. Now, this is dispatch calls for service. This is nothing more than just calls that come in. As you can see us in the red dot with bylaw, you can see us with the green dot without bylaw. You see Moose Jaw, Saskatoon, and Regina. Now, the interesting part of why this is in there is because this is showing the anomaly. As a Prince Albert Police Service, if you look at our last 8 years and you take a simple doubling formula that you would use for your investments to figure it out, that our calls for service are going to double in 8 years unless we change the inputs. There's no way in heck that you can give us enough resources to deal with that, and that wouldn't be cost effective or efficient. So the reality is we have to look at the inputs, and we have to look at some of the things that we can do differently as a collective group. Thus, that's why we went to Scotland. Thus, that's why community mobilization, and thus you'll see some of those answers that actually exist. So in Scotland, to get this to the government's attention, they built a timeline. And they built a real timeline called David's Story. And this is a young fellow who was born in 1981 of an addicted mother. And as you can see, in his first 4 or 5 years of his life, they moved around several times. There was no stability in the home. He was a premature baby. At the age of 6, he went into school. In grade 1, he was being bullied because he was one of the smaller kids. By the time he was in grade 3, he was now the bully, a learned behavior. And as you can see, the violence escalates, and the instability of the home obviously increases. And the time this kid is between 12 and 13, he joins a rival gang and goes on to lead that rival gang. When he's age 16, he's committed on seen on CCTV camera committing a random murder of a guy getting out of a taxi. Goes up and he stabs him. It shows the police chasing him down, and it shows the police catching him. And obviously he's caught and he's put before the courts. Now the story doesn't stop there. David basically is in jail. He's not taking some of the program for whatever reason. He doesn't want to take the program or doesn't think it applies to him. When he's in jail, his mother dies of an overdose. Social services come along and they put David in the care of Grandma. Grandma runs one of the largest organized crime groups in Scotland, and her 4 sons are the leaders in that organized crime group. So now David becomes immersed in an organized crime culture, and as a result learns that behavior. Long story short, Grandma passes away a short time later, and David takes over organized crime. Now the story here is, what do we do to David's kids? David's story 2. How do we change that from happening? That number 14 there is basically the number of interventions that could have been done before this individual was a teenager and subsequently weren't done. And the reason they weren't done is because every agency had part of the information, but nobody collectively dealt with the issue together collectively. So 14 possible interventions that could have been done were passed because somebody had part of the information, but nobody shared it with others. Now the reality is this isn't meant to point fun at any one particular agency. It's to show that the weakness, that things have to change to be different. And so when we got back, we said, wow, that's a powerful story. And when you hear the passion that's given when they present this to us and show us the timeline, you can see that there was the enlightening part that everybody said, man, we got to change this because we're losing a generation of kids.